Some women don't merely love, they become the pulse of another's existence. They don't chase, don't cling, yet their presence lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade. She was such a woman, her essence a quiet wildfire, consuming his. Thoughts without effort. He didn't just want her. He needed her not as a lover, but as an anchor for the chaos he couldn't name. In her he found an emotional addiction, a craving for the parts of her that mirrored the depths he dared not explore within himself. She moved through the world with a grace that felt like defiance, her silence not empty but heavy with unspoken truths. In Jungian terms, she was his anima, the feminine archetype of his unconscious, a projection of his longing for wholeness. He saw her as a beacon, a woman whose emotional depth seemed to hold answers to questions he couldn't form. But it was his shadow, the unacknowledged fears, the wounds he buried beneath bravado that drew him to her. She wasn't trying to ensnare him. She was simply whole, her self-possession a magnet for his unspoken hunger. The first sign was his need to unravel her. He watched her closely, studying her words, her pauses, the way her eyes held storm she didn't explain. Trauma psychology tells us that those who carry unhealed wounds seek mirrors in others, hoping to see their own pain reflected and resolved. He didn't know why her quiet strength unsettled him, why her refusal to perform for his approval felt like a challenge. He sent late-night messages, probing for her thoughts, craving the emotional intimacy she offered without trying. She didn't feed his need, she simply existed, and that was enough to hook him. The second sign was his unease in her absence. When she stepped back, not out of cruelty, but from a stoic acceptance of what she could not control, his world tilted. He replayed their conversations, searching for the moment he lost her attention, not realizing she was never his to lose. Jung would call this projection. He saw in her the stability he lacked, the emotional clarity he couldn't claim. Her detachment wasn't rejection. It was a boundary, a quiet act of self-preservation. Yet her absence became a void he couldn't fill, his ego rattled by her refusal to be his emotional crutch. You, watching this, have you ever felt someone cling to your energy? Drawn not to your light, but to the strength of your stillness. Pause. Feel the weight of their need. Now imagine choosing yourself instead, not to wound them, but to honor the woman you are becoming. What would happen if you stopped being their anchor? She did. She stopped pouring herself into his voids, stopped softening her edges to ease his discomfort. And in that choice, she became his addiction, not because she sought to be, but because her wholeness was a mirror he couldn't turn away from. The third sign was his obsession with her mystery. He couldn't define her, couldn't box her into the roles he knew: lover, muse, savior. Her emotional self-worth, forged through years of facing her own shadows, made her untouchable. In Jungian terms, she was walking the path of individuation, integrating her light and darkness into a self that needed no external validation. She didn't explain her silences, didn't justify her boundaries. Her refusal to perform for him only deepened his craving, as if by understanding her, he could understand himself. The turning point came when she chose detachment, not as a game, but as a sacred act of reclaiming her energy. Stoicism teaches us to release what we cannot control, to find peace in the acceptance of what is. She saw the girl who once sought love through giving too much, who believed her worth lay in being needed. She held that girl, forgave her, and let her go. Her silence wasn't cold. It was clarity. She wasn't running from him, she was returning to herself, to the woman who knew her value didn't depend on his gaze. His addiction grew in the spaces she left behind. He chased the feeling she gave him, not realizing it was his own unclaimed strength he sought. He wanted her to fill his voids, to soothe his shadow, but she refused to be his salvation. Her power lay in her refusal to shrink, in her courage to stand whole in a world that begged her to break. She became his emotional addiction, not because she tried to be, But because she dared to be complete, flawed, fierce, and free, you, standing at the edge of your own story, what if you stopped being someone's anchor? What if you let your silence speak, your boundaries stand, your wholeness shine? The world may call you distant, but those who crave your energy fear your power. She became his addiction because she chose herself, because her emotional depth was a fire he couldn't extinguish. The woman who knows her worth doesn't fade, she becomes a flame that burns eternal.